Hello, and welcome to Text Appeal Lessons on the Body, Mind, and Beyond. This is the second episode of the series, and today I will be talking about some basic evolutionary theory, and I hope to connect that to our place in the animal kingdom as modern human beings. This is because the practice of neuroscience is not exclusive to the human brain, and this is quite a fascinating area of study, at least in my experience. I will also touch on some neuroscience basics and will heavily focus on something called the dual process model, which is an information processing theory in modern psychology. This episode is a preparation for the next one, which is connected but more focused on goal setting and emotion as previously promised in the first episode. I hope you enjoy, and I hope today has treated you well. So let's get right into it. Today, I will be exploring our intimate relationship with goal setting, and I hope to provide valuable insight on a more nuanced understanding of what emotions are and how they are critically important in understanding human and animal behavior. Let's imagine we could set aside 16 hours to watch the typical behaviors of an average human being as they walk through any given day. For the sake of this imagined story, let's assume that this person is a 25-year-old female who works a 3 to close shift as a waitress in a moderately busy restaurant in the suburbs of, say, Denver, Colorado. It is Monday morning, and she wakes up around 8 a.m., not feeling her very best, but as good as she ever does before getting through her morning routine. She drinks some water, pops a K-cup in the coffee machine, and then takes a shower. Nothing out of the usual occurs all morning. She calls her mother, something she does on most days that provide the opportunity, while cooking a breakfast that she is really no stranger to. She feels the usual kick from the caffeine and uses the boost to hit the grocery store for some essentials that she's running low on. She eventually gets to work, clocks in, and the workday begins. Plenty of regulars come in and greet her with a smile, as she is well aware she is fairly attractive, and on any psychometric self-report survey, she would not display any concerning levels of depression or anxiety. Most days are like this, and they have been for, let's say, the past year or so. You see, most things that occurred on this normal day were fairly predictable, and as human beings, this ability to have a decent prediction for what the next day offers is critically important for our sense of psychological stability. Imagine if her day was plagued by a whole bunch of obstacles, big and small. By obstacles, I mean problems that need to be solved in order to achieve the next task. Maybe she was restless all night because the temperature was too high and her AC wasn't working properly. This made her feel physically and mentally more fatigued upon waking up. Maybe there are no more K-cups in the pantry, so she doesn't get the coffee, which only contributes to this bad morning because now she is experiencing some mild withdrawal symptoms, alongside being tired in the first place. Her mother doesn't answer, which only adds to her anxiety, and on her way to the store, she gets into a fender bender. After exchanging paperwork with the person who hit her car, she still manages to go to the store, but her card gets declined at checkout, as it turns out someone has tried to steal her identity, freezing her bank account. This is all to say that we have better days and sometimes much worse ones. And living your daily life comes with countless decisions to make, some more important than others. Really quickly, imagine her morning one more time, but this time, bless her with a bunch of good experiences and fortunate events that are obviously going to affect her emotional state in positive ways. There is a wide range of potential for what each and every day will bring forth. And understanding your role as an organism in this environment will give you a higher probability that you can engineer your life in a way where the world works for you and where you can avoid unnecessary suffering. The key word here is unnecessary because suffering appears to be the price we pay to experience things like joy, love, and purpose. For the sustainability of a life well lived, it is my understanding that we must continually toggle between good times and bad times. As you think about your own day ahead, watch as a plan comes together in your mind that prioritizes certain actions over others. Your day has to be structured around where the next food and water is coming from, at least to some degree, and if you wait long enough, there will be no other choice but to address this issue or you will literally die. This is the basic nature of goal setting from a psychological point of view, where certain actions are quickly recognized as more significant than others, depending on the context of the goal in question. For example, you likely have to prioritize going to work so that you will have enough currency to sustainably provide yourself and others with food, water, and shelter. We are eternally tasked with work, whether that's a job or some other form of effortful output, so that we may trade this effort for the things we need to go on living. This is just part of the human condition, and it is my aim to help you understand the forces that are constantly and inevitably influencing your behavior in ways that go generally unnoticed until made explicitly clear. None of this is news, but please, take this moment to realize that you are a predictable creature, almost simple in one sense, but terribly complicated in another. The bodily structure that your consciousness inhabits is quite a miracle, with an intricate design armed with plenty of fail-safes for when things threaten your safety and or stability. The most important mechanisms to understand when it comes to goals is your capacity for logic and emotion. Of course, through rationality and reason, the human mind can come up with unbelievably complex schemes revolving around hitting a particular target. But it turns out that without emotions, our rationality quickly becomes quite useless in any practical sense. Emotions are complex, but for now, let's split them into two camps, positive and negative ones. The question then becomes, what exactly do your emotions add or take away from you? To understand this, I will first break down some basic neuroscience so that we can have a foundational understanding of human behavior and what we mean by behavior in general. Let's figure out why we have good days, bad days, and sometimes just another day. This next section will be dedicated to understanding the phylogenetic chronology of brain structures and how this relates to humanity as evidenced by neuroscientific literature and the theory of evolution. Phylogeny is the study of evolutionary relationships and their history. So, phylogenetic chronology refers to the timeline of events related to the emergence and transformation of biological life forms over time. Today, I will not be deep diving into the theory of evolution, as an entire episode would barely scratch the surface depending on how deep one wishes to dig. With this being said, I will be touching on the most fundamental concepts that evolutionary psychology brings into the scientific understanding of humanity. When looking at the physical structure of the brain, let us begin by organizing this supercomputer stuck inside your skull into different parts and theoretical systems. I will try my best to avoid technical language, but strange terminology is quite unavoidable when discussing neuroscience. The human brain is comprised of many structures, some of which are truly ancient, that even resemble the brains of early organisms such as crustaceans. What I mean by this is that through the conservative process of evolution, nervous systems themselves have been conserved for millions of years, and the processes by which our biology regulates itself resemble processes thought to have existed in even the most ancient invertebrates, which precede vertebrates, which are creatures with a spine like you and me. As a modern human being, you are technically a Homo sapien, as human actually refers to a number of species that are a part of the same genus. Homo sapiens are part of the Homo genus, and sapien refers to the specific species that we are within the genus. An example of another genus in the animal kingdom is the Canis genus, which includes the domestic dog, the wolf, and the coyote. These three animals are kind of like cousins, and dog is to wolf as Homo sapien is to Homo erectus, which is another human creature thought to have roamed the earth anywhere from 2 million to 70,000 years ago. Do not be confused into thinking that Homo sapiens evolved out of Homo erectus. Instead, they share a common ancestor, thus making them like cousins coming from the same grandmother. It is not the case that erectus was the grandparent and sapien the grandkid. This is all relevant information because we must accept that the modern human being that roams the earth today is the descendant of many other primates that came before us, but also the descendant of so many other animals. Here is a basic breakdown of the biological taxonomy of the Homo sapien. The most specific class of an animal is the species. So, being a Homo sapien means that that is your species, and species is the specific rank in taxonomy that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. You are a part of the genus Homo, the family Hominidae, the order Primates, the class Mammalia, referring to the fact that you are a mammal, the phylum Chordata, and the kingdom Animalia. You are not a plant or a fungus. You are an animal. The theory of evolution suggests that the traits of an organism are dependent on the expression of genetic information stored inside of DNA. Think of it this way. DNA is the blueprint for the human body and includes directions that instruct your cells to build a body with 4 limbs, 10 fingers, 10 toes, and an extremely complex nervous system. When 4 limbs are not built by your DNA, or when people have really any major abnormality, this is a result of a mutation in DNA. Mutations are nature's way of putting variation into the gene pool. This variation leads to physical changes in the organism, and the organism is then tested by the environment, as nature itself is always challenging the organism's survival by way of predation, food supply, weather, and countless other factors. It is actually so much more complicated than this, but what we must come to recognize as modern humans is that our psychological experience is a manifestation of material brain structures working in concert. The formation of these material brain structures is dependent upon the DNA in which you inherit from your parents, who inherited it from their ancestors countless times over. You are like a machine with a bunch of devices meant to filter information in the environment. Information comes in the form of stimuli, such as light, sound, and temperature. In a book I read about a year ago, titled Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley, this British philosopher makes the claim that the brain is actually an eliminative process, and he even makes the claim that consciousness might be some kind of ambient energy similar to light, in which our brain is receiving, kind of like how you connect to the internet with a technological device. In this sense, consciousness is out there in the world, and our brain is receiving the data and filtering it into what we experience as the mind itself. We can either view the brain as the structure that produces the conscious experience, or we can recognize it as that which filters and transforms worldly information into something comprehensible that is of practical use to the organism in the name of survival and ultimately reproduction. This is more of a philosophical topic, but it is certainly useful to think about the brain's relationship to the entire organism and then to connect the organism to the broader environment. Either way, the experience in which you are having is dependent on material brain structures, their formation, and their levels of activity in any particular instance. The distinction between humans and most other animals is that we have what is called the neocortex. The neocortex is a feature of the brain that only mammals possess, although the complexity varies between mammals and humans, and we primates seem to have the most complex neocortices as far as it is currently understood. Let's now organize the human brain into some useful categories so we can understand Let's now organize the human brain into some useful categories so we can understand human behavior in a more nuanced manner. First, the brainstem. The brainstem is the oldest brain structure, evolutionarily, as it is responsible for basic functions of life, such as breathing and heart rate. The brainstem also serves as a channel for which neural signals are communicated between the brain and the rest of the body. Second, we have the limbic system. The limbic system evolved after the brainstem, and it is primarily evolved in emotion, motivation, learning, and memory. Structures within the limbic system include the amygdala, the hippocampus, the thalamus, hypothalamus, and cingulate gyrus or gyrus, not sure how to pronounce that. Third, we have the basal ganglia. This group of structures is involved in motor control, procedural learning, habit formation, and emotional processing. The basal ganglia includes the caudate nucleus, the putamen, and globus pallidus. Fourth, we have the cerebellum, which is responsible for coordinating voluntary movements, balance, and posture. It also plays a role in motor learning and cognitive functions, such as attention and language. Fifth and final, we have the cerebral cortex or the neocortex. The cerebral cortex is the outer layer of the cerebrum and is the newest and most evolved part of the brain. It is responsible for higher cognitive functions such as sensory perception, motor commands, spatial reasoning, conscious thought, and language. The cerebral cortex is divided into 4 famous lobes: the frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. This is the squishy and wrinkling looking part of the brain that sits on top of the so-called deeper brain structures, such as those found in the limbic system. It is less important to remember the specific functions of these systems and structures, but instead, I want you to grasp how complex your conscious experience really is, and recognizing that some structures are newer and older is fundamental in distinguishing human behavior from other animals. Also note that no brain structures should be thought of as completely responsible for a single function. Instead, the brain communicates with its different parts in ways that are difficult to grasp and at times even appear contradictory. Now, we will connect this basic understanding of your brain and its parts to how it processes information, and in turn how you take this information and make decisions with it. The dual process model is a theoretical framework which explains the process by which humans make decisions. This model was created by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is a very well-known piece of popular science literature, where Kahneman even earned a Nobel Prize for his contributions. This model proposes that there are two theoretical systems in the brain, which are responsible for information processing and decision making. System 1's processing is fast, automatic, and intuitive. System 1 is responsible for that gut feeling you have about something. And although System 1 does not necessarily live inside of any particular brain structure, it is more closely associated with the phylogenetically older limbic system, which, if you remember, is associated with emotion, motivation, fear, learning, memory, and so much more. System 2's processing is often referred to as rational, logical, or deliberate, and is associated with the neocortex, the part of us that allows us to inhibit ourselves from following the path of least resistance. This process is much slower and is based on our ability to recognize the consequences for the decisions we make. Dr. Ellison explains System 1 as the gas and System 2 as the brakes, thus making you like the car. Neither system is better or worse than the other, as certain situations call for quick reactions and others call for a more well-thought-out plan of action. Think making a really important financial decision versus taking a risk based on a gut feeling, as the window of opportunity is tiny and action right this moment is critical. Once again, I will remind you that it is not the case that these systems have a home in the brain, as neuroscience is far too complicated to be thought of in that way. But this metaphor is extremely useful and holds many implications for humanity moving forward. Examples of System 1 type decision making is like reading a word you have seen hundreds of times, or flinching when someone throws a punch at you, while System 2 would be used when sounding out a particularly long and difficult to pronounce term that you have never heard of. System 2 is also active when you are plotting revenge on the person that snuck you with that unsuspected punch from earlier. System 1 is in control when you have an emotional outburst that you may later regret, while System 2 was in use when you deliberately removed yourself from that one situation where you felt yourself becoming angry, and instead of acting on impulse, you rationally chose to take a step back and breathe. This is so important because once you have a deeper understanding of the way in which you make decisions, hopefully you can learn to make ones that benefit you, your community, and maybe even society at large. Understanding Kahneman's two systems theory is more useful than being willfully ignorant to the type of creature that you are. The goal is to understand the fundamental nature of the decision-making process before making decisions. Although, if you choose to read Thinking Fast and Slow, you will realize that inevitably System 1 is going to win more often, and our emotional reactions to any event are what truly dictate our behavior, no matter how rational we believe we are. I am going to close out today's episode with a quick recap, as next time I will return to goals, emotions, drugs, and a closer look at punishment and reward. This episode serves as preparation for the next one, and this is how I plan to structure the entire series. Remember, the totality of your experience is made up of emotional events, and your reaction to an event is dictated by the relationship between your psychology and your biology. You are the product of so much survival and a truly miraculous chain of events that we humans have a hard time even grasping the significance of it. Most of the time, we don't even think in these terms because we are so caught up in the day and the next task. I recommend analyzing the nature of your mind and getting into some type of meditative practice to help you come to terms with what you are. This is especially useful if you are experiencing concerning levels of depression or anxiety, and this is a health and wellness series after all. Also, I want my listeners to understand that I am a deeply curious human, and my worldview does obviously align with a more Darwinian framework the more that I read the literature. This in no way takes away from my recognition of the human experience as deeply spiritual, sometimes religious, and always complicated. My own relationship to God is a complicated one. I like to remember that the Hebraic term Israel translates to struggle with God, and I want you to join me in this struggle of understanding our place in the universe. I struggle with plenty of things, and belief in any orthodox concept of God is one of them. I know you struggle too, and if you're not struggling right now, please be grateful, as tragedy is unfortunately always around the corner. I urge you to keep listening, as I aim to get really honest about my thoughts and experiences as more episodes come out. I am only 21, but I have a serious ambition to form a community of people interested in many similar topics, unafraid to contend with the deepest questions about humanity. And this channel is also a supplement to my pursuit of a graduate degree. So again, thank you for listening to the second episode of Text Appeal, Lessons on the Body, Mind, and Beyond.